Hello, and thank you for joining us. I'm Sandy Potter. Today, we're honored to speak with Dr. Jason Oliver Chang. He is an associate professor of history and Asian American studies and also the director of the Asian and Asian American Studies Institute at the University of Connecticut. Also joining me is Adam Rader, internal communications coordinator for Masonicare. He has been instrumental in facilitating our Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Council. Welcome to you both.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure to have you. May is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Dr. Chang, who are Asian American and Pacific Islanders, and can you tell us the significance of why May was chosen to honor and celebrate the contributions of Asian Americans?
Hi, Sandy. Thanks for the question. Hello, Adam. Thank you for the invitation. So Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders are a really diverse racial and ethnic group. Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders differ in that Pacific Islanders are an indigenous people to the Pacific Islands, but Asian Americans are what we call a pan-ethnicity, that they represent many different ethnicities from many different countries of origin across Asia that extends from the Pacific coast in Asia all the way to the Middle East. And so those are some of the countries of origin that Asian Americans come from. But that's their country of origin isn't all that they are. They speak many different languages, many different ethnicities. And that diversity in Asia is also represented here in Connecticut. So I have a quick map I want to show you of the census data for 2017 in the state of Connecticut. So here we see the numbers for Asian Americans in the state of Connecticut. This is divided by county, and then you can see that there are about 24 different ethnicities represented here, with the largest being South Asians from India, and then also Chinese, and then Vietnamese. Those are the three largest ethnic groups in the state, but you can see that Asian Americans are everywhere in Connecticut, largely in the Hartford County, New Haven County, and Fairfield County, though. So those are some of the largest concentrations of Asian Americans in the state. There are Pacific Islanders here, and they have a long history dating all the way back to the origins of the whaling industry. And so that's, but a significantly smaller population that lives here from the islands, with large population, with a significant community of Chamorros from Guam. So those are our Pacific Islander community. May was chosen. I think there's a couple different origin stories for why May is Asian American Pacific Islander Month. But one that I've heard that I kind of like is that it was the month that the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, and that this was a significant kind of accomplishment that took many many thousands of Chinese workers to complete, and is a fixture of national infrastructure that kind of completes a national narrative of connection between the sea to shining sea kind of image of America. However, it's important to identify that because they've been erased from the history of the railroad for so long, and that migration, that labor migration that brought them to do that railroad work was really fraught and involved some key kind of parables in Asian American history, that they were both desired for their labor, but also then thought of politically, culturally disposable. And so that is one reason why I think that that it became significant to mark their contribution with May and the completion of the railroad, because that kind of treatment kind of is a cycle in Asian American history that we see with different ethnic groups, different labor migrations too.
Dr. Chang, that kind of leads me into my question, which is why is celebrating AAPI Heritage Month so important this year? Why does it have added significance this year?
Yeah, so this year really marks um, uh, uh, an intensity of and a surge of anti-Asian racism that's really been building for the last several years. And if we look at the long spread of Asian American history, we can see that there has always been violence and racism against Asian Americans. But these last few years mark a really, violent and kind of, if I could say, casualization of anti-Asian racism, the kinds of street violence that we've seen against grandmas at the street corner, those kinds of things have really been an indication that the invisibility that Asian Americans often face is translated into their vulnerability, right? And so by celebrating Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month, it's an opportunity to identify those mechanisms of erasure, those mechanisms that keep Asian Americans from being recognized as full American citizens. And recently there was a survey of folks to see if you could name 3 Asian Americans, and the most common answer was, I don't know. The second most common answer was Bruce Lee, who's one of my favorite Asian Americans, born in San Francisco, raised in Hong Kong, becomes superstar. But that was the number of people who could answer Bruce Lee was only 15%. So even that, you think of someone that famous with a sitting vice president who is part Asian American, that recognition that survey is a kind of indication that invisibility is really widespread, and that doing this now is an important kind of inflection point for the nation to reflect on history. We really have to reckon with this past, but then also to make changes to say this is not going to be the same going forward.
Absolutely, Dr. Chang. It's so very important. At Masonicare, we are leaders in senior healthcare, and our mission is really to care for the whole person, mind, body, and spirit. Could you talk about how older adults are revered and cared for in Asian cultures, and what might we be able to learn from them?
As I said before, the experiences of racism in the United States also produce traumatic experiences that can have long-term consequences. And so, as people age, the trauma of a lifetime of facing racism can manifest in particular ways. And so having the ability to recognize those kinds of traumas and to be able to generate dialogue around those can be really useful in addressing mental health issues for aging Asian Americans, because I think there's a risk that that the idea of a kind of model minority generates a kind of image that Asian Americans don't have problems. And that can be really dangerous, because then Asian Americans sometimes don't feel like they can raise their voice when they do have a problem. And then other people don't ask them if they do have. And so that can lead to a lot of, kind of self-doubt, but then also, needs that aren't getting met. And so those are some patterns that I think are really visible. And then also just that when you have memory issues for aging Asian Americans, one of the things that helps to anchor them is their relationship to the past, or to be able to see themselves or their family or their memories represented in the wider culture. And so one of the consequences of invisibility, not only vulnerability, but that sense of kind of mutual recognition, right? That you see yourself in the world. And if you're absent from the world, that reflects internally too. And I think there's a need to, to help people see themselves there in the culture, in the broader culture, and in the care environment. So, those are all really, they may be more broader kinds of issues, not just for Asian Americans, but I think, what I've seen, for instance, Japanese Americans who have survived the incarceration camps of World War II, right? They have particular kinds of mental health needs that are going to differ from their peers in the same age group. Or, for instance, Southeast Asian refugees who maybe experienced, a refugee camp for several years or a decade or more, and that being in a care environment can also be a trigger for PTSD. So, there are different ways that Asian American history isn't just about kind of identifying the forgotten chapter, right? But it's a different worldview that can also help to diagnose certain kinds of cultural issues and help communities, figure out the things that they need. So the history is kind of like I would say history is kind of like a compass and a playbook. And those are some things that I think when we recognize those parts of our community, we see that we can ask different kinds of questions to see what might be useful to them.
Good.
Wonderful, Dr. Chang. We thank you so very much for sharing your time and all of these insights with us today. It's been just fantastic speaking with you.
Thank you so much for the opportunity. This is great.
Thank you.